Here we go. Second time's a charm. Now it's recording. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of the backstory of Bioregional Learning Centers because Joe just published a video. What was that, last week, where he spoke for about 10 minutes on them and talked a bit about Danella Meadows and the Balaton group and how all of this originally came together. And then it's really been kind of quiet for some time in the lead up to this workshop. I've been doing quite a bit of research on bioregional learning centers, and it's funny how little comes up. Mostly things that Joe has published, and then hopefully things that we're doing now will start to appear, and we can really add to the conversation on bioregional learning centers here moving forward. I will post a link to that video that Joe made in the recording reflections that I'll post to Earth Regenerators here in the next couple days. And as I have been doing, I want to open up today by just really briefly saying high level, what are we doing here? What's our shared intention? Well, we're holding a space and building scaffolding for the formation of a planetary network of bioregions to form. Joe and Penny are being invited to bioregions around the world to bring the integrating story of collapse and regeneration, along with the anchoring regenerative tools, or we can call them regenerative orientations, maybe, of pro-social and landscape partnerships. And then as they do so, we're here, we're coming together and holding space, developing ongoing supports, hosting learning journeys and exchanges, and providing opportunities for different bioregions to connect and come into relationship. And as we are traveling to Toronto soon, we're traveling to Buffalo soon, Rochester, perhaps Vancouver Island, perhaps Nicaragua, Italy. It's going to get really interesting having a lot of folks coming in from different bioregions and just trying to figure out how we learn and adapt in parallel. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to explore a really important theme, bioregional learning centers. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to give maybe a 5-minute intro to bioregional learning centers. We're going to jump into some breakout room discussions after that, with some harvests in between. And then at the end, I want to introduce a workshop that I think we might be able to do on the ground in each of our respective communities in parallel as a way of learning together. I think it could be some scaffold building for how this planetary network can come together in parallel learning. So bioregional learning centers. First off, I want to I think it'll reduce confusion if I start out by saying that bioregional learning centers are about so much more than an educational center. Of course, having a center, a portal for learning within bioregions will be valuable for a number of logistical reasons. But I want to preface this with the understanding that we're talking about way more than just a place, just a building that stores and distributes knowledge. What we're talking about is really complex. There's a lot of subtlety to it. I just want to mute everybody real quick. Let's see, participants, mute all. Cool, mute all. So what we're talking about is really complex, is what I was saying, and there's and if this is applied well, if we can see this and step into this experientially in a way that's that addresses or honors all of the complexity, we can really increase the depth of learning together as humans on landscapes and within our bioregions. So it may not be so important that we have a really clear conceptual understanding of bioregional learning centers in the beginning. What's more important is that we feel the potency of learning together and learning how to learn together in ways that increase the health and resilience of our local landscapes and of our land-based communities. It will be profoundly orienting for us to, and here's the really important one, this is the one that I really love, experience the wisdom of learning in ways that are highly integrated, cooperative, and guided by and in sync with the landscape's functions and patterns of expression. And before we explore this experientially, however, which we'll do today, I want to give a little bit of a sense of the complexity involved, because we really are talking about a lot more than an innovation or an iteration on our current systems of education and learning. So I want to highlight the qualitative difference here. Our current systems of education prepare us for a globalized economy, one that is profoundly disconnected from local ecologies and from reality. and in a very fragmenting and frankly, oftentimes destructive way. For one thing, that disconnection allows for the idea of limited growth, unlimited growth, to go unchecked. And without much knowledge and visibility of the health of local ecosystems, we have become mostly blind to the planetary crisis of overshoot. We're going to have a little bit of time to talk about that topic in particular today, a reflection on our current forms, our current models of education. So bioregional learning centers are about nothing short of learning how to learn as people representing a landscape. And this is where it gets really interesting, it's fractal, as the landscape also then is connected to larger ecoregions. And as our larger ecoregions are then connected to continents, and then continents finally come together in a whole and integrated Earth. So this is like the animation, if you will, of Earth learning processes. It's fascinating. I love this idea. And this is about understanding the cultural and ecological histories of place and how those stories arrive into the present. This is about rediscovering and re-embodying into our local context, then adapting from there, through cooperation, integration, intention, and holism. This is about forming learning processes where everyone throughout the community participates throughout their entire lives, because learning doesn't need to end. And this is about forming learning processes where theory is not isolated, it's not in ivory towers, it's dynamically connected to practice in an ongoing way. And this is about forming learning processes that are a part of local governance, that is integral in the decisions that we make as communities, and that guide flows of life-giving resources to where life needs them most. So hopefully this is starting to give us a sense of the complexity involved here. This is all very big, organic, and beautiful. And it's a bit of a mess as well. But I think it's also really accessible. So we're just going to jump in. We're going to actually start this today. And I've got just a few more things I want to say before we jump into conversation. Because bioregional learning centers are a way of learning that tears down all walls and boundaries in terms of where and how learning happens, we can say that we're participating in a bioregional learning center right now, today. Because bioregional learning centers exist anywhere people are learning to live in and care for place, for landscapes, for each other. I've mentioned already, there's a lot of subtlety to this idea. It can really open up the ways that we see and participate in education, as well as how we teach and how we lead learning processes. So right now, where we all are today in this Zoom space, we are learning to care for our places. So in a sense, we're convening multiple bioregional learning centers right now. Nobody can tell us that we're not doing that. That's how fuzzy the boundaries are. So let's feel into this being a space where bioregional learning centers are learning together. As I mentioned earlier, in a bit, I'm going to introduce an experiment for an ongoing process that I think that can scaffold collective learning. But first, I want to create an opportunity for us all to explore this concept more deeply, to get familiar with it, to hear one another and explore our own perspectives on education and on learning. So with all that said, now I can jump into introducing our two conversation topics. And I'm going to post a notes document in the chat. Our time together is so precious. If somebody in each of the breakout rooms could volunteer to take notes, so that we can see what happened, can hear what happened in these conversations, and in some sense carry that forward. I'll include it in the reflections. And then when we come back to harvest, if somebody can also sort of self-organize around that responsibility, that would be great. And then the last thing that I want to say before we jump into these conversations, before I introduce these two provocations, is I want to talk about the 4 intentions, the way the council, Scott Brown from Paonia introduced this to me a few weeks back, and I just love it. I think it is an excellent practice for cultivating collective intelligence. So those 4 intentions are to speak from the heart, to listen from the heart, to be lean in expression, so try not to ramble too much, really honor the conversational thread that is shared between us, and try not to deviate or disrupt that too much. And then the last one is to be spontaneous. So just really listen when others are talking, when it's your turn, just speak from the heart, like the first of the intentions says. So you've got the notes document in the chat. I'm about to post the first prompt, the first question in the chat as well, and then I will pause for comments and questions. So this first question is, Let's explore the failures of our current model of education as an entry point to thinking about how learning can and needs to be bioregional. And if you need a little bit more of a provocation, think of globalized and decontextualized knowledge, and in your experience in life, what that has resulted in. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to see where this first conversation goes. That first ramble took 15 minutes. And so I want to pause real quick and see if there's any questions or comments before we jump in, before I set these breakout rooms up. Looks like we've got clarity. Okay, so there's 17 of us. Let's see. We could do 5 rooms. I'm going to set up 5 rooms. So they'll be pretty small groups, at least this first round. And like I mentioned in the beginning, it'd be great if everybody could very briefly introduce themselves, just say where you are and what your name is. And then we'll go for 20 minutes. We'll go for 15 minutes. How's that sound? Does that sound good to everybody? We're all in agreement. I'm seeing thumbs up. Okay. All right, so I created them and I'm going to open them now. I'll be seeing some of you soon. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had some nice conversations. Hey, Bennett, what's going on? Yeah, does anybody want to get us started and share what happened in your breakout rooms? I think we probably have about, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes to share here, depending on where the conversation goes before we go into the next topic. Any bold volunteers? Irvi and then Preston. I think I saw a few hands actually. Yeah, Irvi, then Preston, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I was the note taker in our group, so I'll share a few of the big themes. Probably what feels most important to start with is the sense. I think we all had a shared sense that we didn't want. We felt like failures of the current system. Didn't feel like a good place to start. We didn't have lots of energy to go towards failure. I think there was more appetite towards sensing into potential and seeing how we can avoid the constant polarization that many of us are ingrained in, and more look at, what's the potential at the interface. And we talked about this phrase I'd heard Mila use, but I'm sure others have heard it too, around acting locally, collaborating regionally, and learning globally, recognizing it's not so neatly compartmentalized, and multiple things are happening at all 3 levels, but it provides some kind of frame. So we explored that a bit, and then I felt MIDI very much embodied one of the aspects of what feels important as a future educational approach, which is following where the energy is and tapping into what's most alive, rather than feeling like, oh, now we have to be in this group and we have to answer this fixed question and we have to come up with these 3 bullet points on that topic, and that doesn't always allow for just kind of flowing into where the most energy is. So we all felt like there was more appetite for just learning specifically about what was happening in each person's bioregions, what they were learning. And we kind of went there and heard a bit from Midi and Steve, but actually ran out of time. So that could have been a whole breakout session in itself, in terms of really getting to, really starting to get into some of the nitty gritty of what's happening in specific places.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, Preston.
I'll keep this brief. I actually wasn't the note taker. Charles was nice enough to do that in our group, so I'm sure he can add a little bit to this. But I think the sort of what I saw happening between the 3 of us was that the biggest piece of it, I'm not sure if this was the intention of the question, but it was the uncomfortability of the question about sitting with the failure, sitting with what's going wrong, and being stuck in that spot and having to dwell on that idea. And luckily enough, both Charles and Trisha both are actually working in places where they're able to really be a part of the journey out. And so they, of course, they're very excited to move into that direction and totally understand. I think that sort of sits the whole question about the Ecoversity strategy is how to go from this place of being uncomfortable and watching challenge and trouble, and how do we then pathway that over through to the tools, the strategies, but to do it in a way that creates that inspiration and allows so many more to join along, because the systems are so disconnected from where they should be. And so rebuilding structures, scaffolding to be able to see a pathway through when you don't live within one is what I could see coming out of that conversation.
One thing that Trisha brought up was the importance of unlearning, which I thought was really important. And I think, so how do we sort of unlearn our existing patterns and support experimentation? So how do we support trying things, not knowing if they're actually going to work out, and then assessing that, and that can be okay. So I think that, anyway, I really appreciated that from Trisha and our group.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sensing a theme of uncomfortability with the particular topic, and that's great. The next one is the way out. We'll reflect on experiences that we've had in bioregional learning. I'm curious if anybody else would like to share on this somewhat uncomfortable topic before we move on. I know, Jan, did I see your hand briefly? Yeah.
Yes, we talked about the lack of coherence and integration. I don't think there was, for me, wasn't a sense of uncomfortableness, because it just feels really good just to name it and going, yeah, that wasn't great, and this is why it didn't work for us, and we want something more. So lack of coherence, the abstraction, the lack of integration, the sense of not having anything that really connected us with the place that we're in. But also, I think all of us named that we were seeing changes in the kind of schooling a lot of kids are getting now that was very different than our age group, that there was more experiential learning and being outdoors. And so there was like a feeling that was being called for, a shift was happening.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I sense that too. Risa, I see your hand.
Yeah, wanted to mention that like I would actually rather be talking about experience from bioregional experience rather than about. So I'm still at this conceptual level.
Well, that sort of invites me to share that we're going to end this workshop by introducing a workshop we can all do on the ground together that really invites us into experiencing it and together, which I think is going to be really interesting. So I completely agree. This has got to be experiential. It's ironic to talk about this conceptually at first, but I think it's an important place to start at the same time. Yeah, Risa.
I'm sorry, I just forgot to add, we also talked about is what, if anything, do we want to redeem from the current model? And Mitty mentioned how, isn't it wonderful that we can all meet across the world? And I thought that the medical advances, that our lifespans have increased. So there are things not everyone will agree, but some things that are redeemable.
Yep, indeed. Yeah, Ken, and then I think Gail as well, right?
Oh, well, I had to drop off, so I'm a little out of context. Benji, you are in our group and may have reported on it, so you can skip past me or I can give a few quick comments. Okay, well, Benji was in our group and he was a little surprised because we all started sort of speaking more individualistic about our reactions to school, as opposed to thinking systemically about how it related to bioregions. But some of the things that we discerned was the notion of how schools were frequently indifferent to children with different learning styles and very exclusionary and systematically excluded certain children from participation. We observed that there was, in some cases, lots of choices into different disciplines, and having that choice created for lots of hands-on learning opportunities, which was positive. I think it was generally seen as too broad of a topic, that there are huge differences in learning about trade versus agriculture versus going into a discipline. And what I would add would be something like leadership. So we were left with questions about interconnectedness and the breadth of this topic. And I think also we shared the notion that we too were seeing some very advanced forms of education taking place in terms of hands-on learning in environmental schools. There you go.
Yeah, pretty comprehensive. Yeah, thank you for that. Very articulate, Gail, and then RJ, and we'll see where we're at that point in time. We might move on to the second topic.
The interesting theme that rose, even unspoken, was there was a difference between kids who were farm raised and kids who were raised in a town. And I think those that are more rural have a strong, a really strong birth connection to the land, and learn things we don't even know we know until, later when we look at our development patterns. So that was it, Mitty.
Actually, I apologize, Mitty. I accidentally lowered RJ's hand. Can we go RJ?
Oh, RJ, yes,
hear from
thanks.
Mitty?
Thanks.
I didn't raise my hand. I was saying thumbs up to Gail.
Oh,
Yeah, I think Bennett actually has the notes. But to summarize very quickly, it was an amazing 15 minutes. It seemed to me we came full circle through any education experiences that we had back to what we were when we were little kids. And fortunately, I think we had a background on the farms and on the land and quite a range of experience till it was tamped down. So I'll go back to that. Maybe Bennett has another summary.
Yeah, I think that you spoke to it pretty well there. Just that connection from a young age being so critical to being able to kind of see through the miasma of the current system and not be fully bamboozled by it. That to me is a big piece. And I know Joe speaks to that a lot, and a lot of other, visionaries who I'm aware of are like, we got to get the children, get them while they're young. And that way they don't have to unlearn all this stuff. They can just learn how to do it from the get-go. So
yeah. I think this is a lot of this is pointing to how experiential this will be and needs to be. And so I wonder with that, it seems like a sort of natural segue, or the energy is going there anyway. Maybe we begin to talk about our experiences of bioregional learning, times we've seen bioregional learning, times we've experienced bioregional learning. And so I'll post this next question in the chat. So I pretty much already said it, but let's see, to everyone, what experiences in bioregional learning have you had? And feel free to share stories of when you've learned about your bioregion, about your local landscapes and ecology, and then also your land-based community. And it seems like the conversation, the energy is going there. I think, like Meady said earlier, follow the energy. It seems like that's where it's going anyway. So it seems like we're kind of primed to talk about this for a little bit. How about we do it in breakout rooms we can go 15 minutes again, and then we might have to do a shorter share because I want to leave enough time to share this workshop with everybody, because I think that learning in parallel and bringing this to the ground as soon as possible is really what we're here to do. So we'll stay in conceptual space for another 15 minutes, and then we'll share together for just a little bit and before we move on. So with that, are there any questions before I set up breakout rooms once again? Are we good? I'm seeing shakes of the head. Okay. All right, so I'm going to recreate the rooms. I'm going to make 5, if it'll let me. Okay. Recreate. And I'll see you all soon. So 15 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had some good conversations. Bennett, once again. I'm wondering if anybody's ready to share what came out of the breakout rooms, experiences of bioregional learning. Our conversation was pretty rich and orienting. I can certainly share unless somebody's ready to give us a glimpse of your conversation. Any bold volunteers? Well, I'd like to actually share what happened right at the end, Steve, because there's this fractal nature to bioregional learning, and Steve right at the end brought in the whole picture and just how big and grand it is, and this brings me to a conversation that Joe Penny and I have been having more and more, that I shared in the latest newsletter, as we've been thinking about this concept of bioregional learning, of learning to represent our landscape and see its functions and see its natural patterns of expression, and in some way embody that and represent it deeply. It's only natural to think about the larger and larger scales, and then to think about this planetary learning process. It just brings us back to this big picture, this big dream, this big aspiration that we're all organizing within. And it's can easily be overwhelming, but I hope this doesn't sort of distort the field, if you will, about this conversation regarding bioregional learning. But it's just so interesting to me, and it's so inspiring to have this big North Star that continually orients us, that, as Steve said, we become accustomed to talking about that story, to seeing it, to aspiring towards that really, really big thing, that big scale thing, that thing that's going to take generations. And I just wanted to share that. I think it's really orienting and exciting to come together under that. I think it's ultimately inspiring and very energizing, albeit it'll take a little while. Anybody want to take it from there? Trisha.
Okay, I'll chime in. So we came back into, experiential learning, right? So like all bioregional learning really being experiential. RJ brought in, experiential with the land, and with the waters, and being in nature as something that really supported his bioregional learning. I brought in the stories of the people, and how that has helped me in understanding my bioregion more, as seen through the people who are from this place and have lived in this place their whole lives. And then, sorry, I didn't see your name, but our other fellow traveler from Peonia.
Marta.
Marta, wonderful. Marta brought in her experience with children, and the bioregional learning as engaged in with the children and seen through their eyes. And so for all of us, it was like just really firmly grounded in experience. So that's that. Thanks.
Yeah, Marta, did you want to go next, or are you just giving an approval? Okay, sounds good. Anybody want to take it from there? Share what came up in your conversation, or what's coming up for you right now? Needy.
Well, there are two themes that I think I really take from these two conversations, and the first is really the affirmation that people born and brought up in an urban setting actually have more work to do to begin to focus bioregionally. And it feels such a self-evident truth, but as a kind of learning interacting principle, it seems to me really core to kind of start with where did people grow up? What are their stories of relationship with the land? And I don't think I've ever seen that so clearly as I have today. And the other thing that we really talked about a lot, in our wonderful group was feedback loops, and the key to really learning being noticing the feedback. And I think that's really reinforcing exactly what RJ and Trisha and friends are speaking about, the experiential learning. You have the experience, but you also need to reflect on what was that experience and what's the result of it? What is the effect of that kind of intervention of the experience, telling me, telling us, telling the whole system. So it's been really valuable. Thank you.
And Jan, you want to take it from there?
Yes, we talked about the experiences of being in place that were so vital and so enriching, and then the loneliness if we couldn't find others in that place that related to the consciousness that we felt also had to be there, and how to work with that place of finding home and finding people, which still feels difficult, and also the finding the richness of place and that connection, and then also what it's like to then see the devastation. So there was both that, again, the sense of the paradox of the deepening, the learning, the coming home, but also feeling the pain of places that have been so destroyed, or so where people have been living in such disconnection for so long. So the bioregional learning brings the paradox, I guess.
Yeah. Claire.
Yeah, I think just tacking on to what Mehdi was saying was that in natural systems, the feedbacks feel really true, and whereas in social systems, there's also this incoherence that was happening around, and yet so what is accepted as truthful is whoever's deciding that that's the truth, and the feedbacks exclude some of the feedbacks that might actually put that into question. Whereas in nature, so that there's I was sharing this, that I had a sense that I could trust natural systems in a way that I couldn't trust social systems. And yeah.
Yeah, the topic of authenticity came up in one of our rooms, and natural systems can't help but be authentic. Marta.
Yeah, I want to share that the experience for me come from go out of the mind and feel. Sometimes you don't have that experience like hands-on, but you can have the experience of sit still and observe nature or human nature. So this sounds like so simple, but we have been educated to be on the mind. So it's a constantly awareness about how we go into the heart and observe and understand reality from that. I'm a learner. I'm not done. I'm every day, every moment I have to remember ourselves to understand, because we're trying to understand by the head, like I said, automatically, unless you are more in nature, immersed in nature, and then you have more experience with the animals and, with your hands that ground us. But that automatically process is something that we really need to put attention, because we are not going to solve problem by the mind. I just wanted to bring back that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marta. Yeah, I think it's a really important thing to emphasize, this impulse that we have towards conceptualizing, towards abstraction. I mean, it's just the world we come from, of decontextualized, globalized education. I think it's trained us in a certain way. It's developed that impulse. And how do we think about, learning, bioregional learning going forward, and how do we retrain that impulse? What does that impulse look like? What is the experience of that in a world where we are learning to deeply care for our places? I think that there's still some conceptualizing, there's still some abstraction, but it's also getting out and experiencing. It's also leading with the heart, and it's developing a discernment of, well, what does the landscape want next? What does the community want here? How can we sense make with everything in mind?
Yeah, to just finish with that idea, in the spiritual or traditional spiritual, we learn how to put the mind in no words, no thoughts, and which is not easy, but that is the point, because when we don't have that incredible thoughts coming and going, then we really can observe. So the practice of that, I would say, is something very important for all of us as a personal practice, because, yeah, I mean, that is a key to enter a quiet mind, to enter into the heart and listen with the heart. Wow, sounds simple.
And how do we do that as collectives too? How do we have that presence and that awareness as collectives, which is a really interesting point. I think that is part of bioregional sense making. That same mindfulness we're cultivating as individuals, if we have a meditation practice, how do we do that as a whole? That's really interesting to me. I think it's a big part of bioregional learning centers, frankly, and the discernment process. Yeah. So
I think that is the frequency state. So
yeah.
If everyone get it, I mean, if we start to calm down, anyway, you transmit it to the whole. I feel like the transformation come from within first, then you leak on you into the whole. So we don't have to be worried about the total. We have to be worried about our local. Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So we've got 16 minutes left. I'd love to hear from Ken and Meaty, but I think I'm going to we'll end this portion of the workshop with Meaty, and then I'll introduce the on the ground workshop that I would love to invite some co-participation with, invite you all to take it to your places and for us to learn together in that process. But before I get ahead of myself, Ken and Meaty, love to hear from the two of you.
Well, I'll be brief, but what you were just speaking of came up in our group, and I think it's really powerful stuff. The Chinese, for example, have the concept of geomancy or feng shui, which is a very deep reading of landscapes and is a powerful place of learning. Another key point that came up was that this is not new, that we have all grown up experiencing this. And I put a link into the chat session on a book that really woke me back up to the fact that this has been going on for a while. And it is about an anthropology of place, which links together three powerful ideas, which is bioregionalism, eco-villages, and permaculture. And the last thing I want to share, which goes to what Mitty was saying, is that one of our members has had this experience of now living in London and having grown up in Mumbai. And we sort of teased apart some of the key differences here, where London is kind of a dead urban environment. Mumbai is this very awake, spiritual, cultural place that teaches interconnectivity. So it isn't necessarily the case that urban environments are going to leave us all devoid of this sense of connection to earth and place.
That's so helpful, Ken, and thanks, Irvi. That must have been your experience. What's really funny is I've been in Mumbai and I wouldn't call it a city. to me, it's a place of many people, but it's so full of life and so full of nature in amongst the people. So that's really interesting to explore. I just wanted to come back to the unlearning piece, what's the dialogue between the two of you just now, Benji, because this whole thing about what we were trained in, we were trained to know things. We were trained to tell people what we know. We were trained to be first, second, third, or fourth in class or whatever. We had this deep ingraining of competition. And what I've realized listening to this conversation is that, first of all, if I'm in a group, the pressure on me to know is much less. I don't need to know everything because there are, 20 other people in the room with me, and one of them may know what's needed, and I can relax. My nervous system can relax. One of us here knows what's needed in the moment. And I think that's where following the energy is so key, and being willing to just let go of fear. For me, a lot of it's about fear. Security, safety. Am I safe? Am I secure? Am I doing things the way they need to be done? Am I being useful here? And that whole relaxing piece is so key to unlearning, I feel. So I really thank the two of you for that interchange on the knowing bit. Thanks.
Thank you, Meaty. And to me, that just brings in pro-social too, to be able to relax into the whole, to create these containers where we can be safe, relating to each other in really deeply collaborative ways. We can be sure that we're not going to be taken advantage of, and we can relax into that collective intelligence, and which is even more powerful when we're bringing in landscape partnerships, because the landscape itself can hold a lot of that sense making, can hold a lot of how it wants to be organized. It can share that information with us. So there's a further relaxing into the whole when we have these pro-social groups that are also landscape partnerships. So yeah, thank you all for that. I hope that that was a fruitful conversation, and I'm very excited to share this workshop with you all. I think it's pretty simple, actually, and it really invites the experience of bioregional learning centers. And I'm going to post this document. I think that it should have commenting rights for everybody. Please let me know if that's not the case, and I'll adjust the permissions. And so earlier I introduced the idea that we were going to have a workshop that we could do on the ground in each of our bioregions to sort of scaffold this collective learning. And so this is kind of an experience in a very broad sense as well. I'm trying to learn how we can learn together. And so please feel free to share with me how you respond, how this seems to you, if there's any other design ideas that you have throughout this entire process. And so the template for it, I'll also post a template in the post with the recording as well. But the intent is to introduce the idea of bioregional learning centers to our communities, and to begin to simply bring more energy to organizing our existing bioregional knowledge base. And like I've mentioned, for us to explore how we as bioregions can come here to this space, to the planetary network, and learn in parallel, and in some sense design and adapt together. And so the idea is to share with community members the experience of bioregional learning, experience the wisdom of it, the accessibility, feel the need for bioregional learning, feel how natural it is, develop a sense for, like I mentioned before, how big, organic, and beautiful it can be, and to make this fun as well. And so it's simply taking out a few members of our community to the landscape somewhere, to find somewhere maybe with a broad view of the landscape, and then have a dialogue. And so the landscape itself will be the context. And then I also shared in that document the little prelude that I had at the beginning of this workshop where I explained bioregionalism. If you want to share with whoever it is that's on the landscape with you that that context as well, that description of bioregional learning centers, being in that place and being within those ideas within that story, I think can really open us up to a couple different provocations, 2 different themes that we could then explore in dialogue. And this is a process of beginning to map ourselves. And so the first is to get to know the people, and to do so, ask the participants, what diverse group of people do we as a bioregion need to assemble to be able to more fully see all of the regenerative activities that already exist? What capacities do we already have? What generative knowledge base do we already have? What people are already working on this? And if we could do that while we're out on the landscape, I think it'll be really powerful. And then the second, which I think we really want to be on the landscape for, is to get to know the land. And to do so, ask the participants, what diverse group of people do we as a bioregion need to assemble to be able to more fully understand how our local landscape functions? And I just sense that that would be a really, really rich conversation that can really invite us to begin thinking about how we organize this knowledge, how we bring it together and then be able to move on it, to be able to enter practice, to be able to wayfind forward and see, well, what do we do next together? And so with 8 minutes, not a whole lot of time, I hope that the idea was clear. Maybe I'll field any questions or comments first, but I'm just curious what people think of the idea in general. Is this something that we want to participate in? Does it make sense to do something like this and then come back together as a group, as a planetary network, and share our learnings as hosts, as participants? Yeah, what inquiries do we have? Claire, I see your hand. Yeah, please kick it off.
I love that. The one thing that does stand out to me is I'm sort of thinking about Cowichan and just the fact that there are actually quite a lot of nature, sort of going out into the bioregion learning walks that are already occurring in different ways. There's the forest schools and what have you. And just, I think that just being aware of what's going on and maybe joining some of those, as well as sort of perhaps planning our own walks. But there is something that doesn't go down well, I think, when we plan something like that without having done that just sort of acknowledgement of what's happening already. There's a kind of, yeah, I'm not going to try and explain that more. Hopefully it just is obvious.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is obvious. It's important to recognize who's come before, to honor that, absolutely. But what I've also, or I should say, and what I've also experienced through these activation workshops with Joe is there's so much that already exists in all bioregions, beautiful regenerative projects, but it's this story of integration that I think changes a lot. It opens up a whole new world of possibility. And so, you know, if I was hypothetically, I'm not in that context, but hypothetically, if I, you know, approach the forest schools, bring the story of collapse and regeneration, bring the story of bioregional activation, and invite them into co-facilitation, co-participation. And also, I don't think that there's much harm in starting this with just a small group of friends. Bioregional learning can happen at an individual level. It can happen with just a few people. I think that the important thing is just to get going, to start seeing things more clearly with more people, practice the conversations and see where it goes from there. This is a highly adaptive process, and I think that it's really hard to predetermine. But I do appreciate the point very much. Yeah. Is there anybody else that would like to bring any questions, suggestions, inquiries about this workshop? Or is this something you want to participate in or not? Marta?
Sorry, I have a question, but
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just connected with the workshop. But I was thinking about creating this bioregional learning. That, for example, I'm thinking in like 3 different projects where they are not connected with this yet. They don't know this. So, or if they know, they are too busy working. So and they are very success, and what they are bringing is so important to like create, because I'm thinking, what are my immediate process that I can link, right? That is what I am in something that, why I link into this, because I cannot think in like, oh, I want to do this super big into this bioregion. It make me overwhelmed. So the point is, for me was like how I approach this people, how I'm going, because I don't know if I'm the best ambassador, to explain it well. But so I thought, well, I'm going to I'm going to do volunteer with them. I'm going there and trying to get that relation building, but that is my question. How do you do it? Or how many different ways you can do it?
There's certainly a lot of different ways you can do it. I think that this reminds me of the idea of just becoming friends with as many people as possible and just focus on authentic relationships in the beginning. Yeah, and I'm noticing we only have like 3 minutes left. I'd love to hear from Gail and RJ, and perhaps I'll invite the people who don't have any other obligations to stick behind for just a minute, and we'll do one-word checkouts on how we're feeling. But let's hear from Gail and RJ before we do that.
This rises from one of the breakout groups, the last one, I guess, that each one of us have moved around the planet. We've been migrants much of our lives and have lived in different bioregions. And, Jen has studied bioregions deeply for decades, but I haven't. And so this perspective is still new to me. But as I realize that I know in my bone self, I know many different bioregions. I also have friends in many different bioregions. And so all of a sudden the little spider webs are starting to go out, and I'm starting to see into other people's bioregions that are in my circle of friends. It's very cool. This exercise could be a lot of fun. Over to you, RJ. Thanks, Benji.
Yes, as far as this makes so much sense, I would just say, start with something that's already there, acknowledge that it's there and that it's been there. The other thing is the size of the group. Try not to make it too large. Again, that magic number of 12 to 15 is probably the kind of maximum to do that effectively. At least starting out with that. And you can do multiple groups, but the walking with that group, the casual aspect of that. And yeah, I think as Mitty said, and then the follow-up from that, it's a very easy process. Yeah, that's the place to start. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, RJ. And thank you everyone for your input. And feel free to, when I post the recording and reflections, to add more input there. If you have a link to the document, the workshop document itself, you can also comment there. And I'm going to, in the next few days, work on a bit of reflections. And I want to try to invite people to do this and actually follow up and see what happens and what we learn together. And I'd love to have a follow-up meeting sometime in the next month. As I mentioned earlier before, this is all part of a wider effort to learn how we can learn together, how we can scaffold parallel learning. And so thank you all so much for joining today. Really appreciate it. Probably a vacation weekend or week for a lot of you still. So I appreciate it even more. We're at time now. If anybody has to leave, feel free. Otherwise, we can go around the circle, big circle, and just share one word, how you feeling, and pass it along too. Are there any volunteers to kick us off? RJ, you want to start it since your hand's already up or still up from your question before?
It's the energy of the heart. Very much present. Thanks. And Ken?
I'm feeling a sense of wisdom and coherence. Mati?
Marta?
Marta?
I am very excited and I have hope. It does. Thank you.
Hey, Bennett, how about you take it from here and then pass it along?
Elizabeth, AG.
What was that?
Elizabeth.
Oh, Elizabeth. Bennett, we'll come back to you. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, I feel curious. I think we already did this in Paonia, right? Yeah. So I don't know. I think that there's just like a lot more to it on an interpersonal level. This is not one word, but I'm curious, you know, and I see the value in it. But I think it's more when it comes down to the actual bioregion, it's like definitely like an interpersonal thing that breeds trust, you know, and breeds like momentum.
Bennett, you want to take it from here now?
Yeah, I'm glad there was a pause for me actually, because a phrase came to mind, but I had to look it up because it's a Spanish palindrome, and I just had to look it up to remember it. I got the general gist of it, but it's La ruta no soporta otro paso natural, which is the same forwards and backwards. And the English translation is the path provides the natural next step. And that was what just percolated up into my consciousness, so felt pertinent. Let's go, Preston.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me is emergence, emergence at the personal level, and that's part of what that workshop is about. But then it becomes the emergence at the group level, at the community level when it's presented, and fusing those, the personal and the community, I think is key. Excited about it. Has Claire spoken yet?
Not yet. Thanks, Kristen. Just gratitude that there are others I can explore this with. And I will pass to Gail.
I feel the same gratitude, Claire. How exciting, the road ahead. Peace and love. Now pass to RJ.
I think RJ kicked us off, right? Yeah. I think it's just Jan and myself. Jan, do you want to go next? Thanks.
Yeah, gratitude for having people with intent and wisdom to walk the path with that Bennett referred to, and over to Benji.
Yeah, I love what Bennett brought in. I'm gonna be mulling on that for a little while. I'm thinking gratitude is what I want to just share with you all. I'm feeling that deeply. Appreciate you all. Those of you who've been continuing to show up to these sessions. As I try to learn what I'm doing, I'm sort of fumbling every now and then, and you guys keep showing up. And I think that we have a lot of shared intention here, and I really, really am deeply grateful for that. So thank you. Yeah, onward. This Saturday, we're going to do a little reflection for the end of the year. If you want to come, it'll be kind of low key. And next week, we're going to reflect on the whole ecosystem that's emerging and how we can fund it and bring more capacity to it. And if I don't see you all, Happy New Year. And yeah, thanks again, once again, for coming.
Yeah, and Benji, thank you for all that you've done to organize this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.